So our next presenter is going to be Wyatt Moran, and Wyatt has been helping with a research project we've got running up in the Sangres, and he's been a tremendous help over the last 2 years really, and is a tremendous hiker, which is one of the main qualifications for this research, is getting up and down the Sangres.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Armstrong. Hello everybody, my name is Wyatt Moran, and today we're going to be talking about the possible effects of mine shaft gating in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Now, before we dive into the research, I'm going to give you a little bit of history on not only Colorado's mining, but also the questions and concerns that first led us to this project. It is believed that mining in Colorado began as early as 1758. However, it wasn't until roughly 100 years later when an expedition by the Russell brothers led to the discovery of gold near Denver. This began Pike's Peak Gold Rush and brought many settlers to Colorado. Now, Colorado's Rocky Mountains are home not only to gold, but also to silver, copper, molybdenum, and many other precious metals. These rich resources interested early settlers in the Sangre de Cristo mountain range located east of Alamosa. And mining is believed to have begun in the Sangre de Cristos as early as the turn of the 20th century. As you can see here on the right is the remains of a large mining operation located in the Sangre de Cristos encountered during our field work. As you can imagine, after a century or two of mining, this industry has left quite an impact on the landscape of Colorado. In fact, Colorado has an estimated 23,000 abandoned mine shafts, of which only 6,000 have been remediated by the Colorado Division of Mining, Reclamation, and Safety. These now derelict shafts compose numerous risks to humans and wildlife passengers, such as cave-ins. As you can see in this photograph, these two large boulders appear to have collapsed over the front of this mine shaft. They also have the possibility of drowning from water seepage. Rotting wood and rusted metal, poisonous gases such as carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and methane can build up to very toxic levels in these shafts. There's also the buildup of acidic minerals such as sulfides, which can escape and pollute local water systems. Perhaps the most famous example of this is the 2015 Gold King mine blowout that occurred near Silverton, Colorado. This blowout actually led to 3 million gallons worth of wastewater polluting the Los Animas River, turning it a bright yellow, as you can see here. This went on to pollute not only Colorado, but also New Mexico and Utah. Now, acidic mine drainage is referred to as the outflow of acidic or low pH water that is often the result of mining activity when acidic minerals such as sulfides are exposed to oxygen or water. This wastewater can lead to the contamination not only of water systems, but also aquatic life and the general degradation of surrounding ecosystems. However, this is not the only environmental concern present with abandoned mine shafts. This is not an aging gray-haired bat. This is actually a bat in the grip of a disease known as white nose syndrome. This fungal disease, also known as Pseudogenescus destructans, has become an increasing concern in recent years. First discovered in 2006 near New England, this fungus ingests and invades bat skin, actually going after the keratin found within. This is what it uses to survive and reproduce. As you can imagine, this is quite irritating to the bat and causes them to wake up during their hibernation. This can be very deleterious for several effects. This constant irritation will prevent them from returning to a hibernatory state. And in winter months, when bats are usually hibernating, there's very little food resources, so the bats will quickly burn through their limited fat reserves and die of starvation. To date, this disease has killed roughly 6.7 million bats. Now, this may seem like a large number, but if we think about a hibernating bat population, they're often grouped very close together, and this fungus can spread very quickly between these hibernating bats. This is a range map of the disease. As you can see here, this is the initial single cave that this disease was first discovered in. In the 10 years since then, it has spread to cover most of the eastern United States. While the western United States are relatively clear to date, there's still much potential for this disease to spread west. So many western states have proposed different measures to prevent the spread of this disease. To that effect, Colorado is one of the states that has proposed the addition of bat-friendly gates to many mine shafts. Now, why would these gates prevent the spread of this disease? Well, Pseudogenescus destructans is a fungus like any other. It reproduces through spores, and bats are not the only carriers of these spores. Any passengers into mine shafts already contaminated with Pseudogenescus destructans can carry spores on their shoes, clothing, or even their fur. So humans and wildlife can carry these spores to new mine shafts and new bat populations unknowingly. These gates would allow bats to enter and exit mine shafts using echolocation, while preventing these larger travelers. Now, while bats were observed during the study, they were not recorded. As you can see here, this is a bat that is entering a mine shaft using echolocation. It has no trouble moving through these bat-fender gates. Now, observational evidence has confirmed that both puma and black bear are using the mine shafts in the Sarnia Crista Mountain Range. In fact, both of these photos were taken near the Great Sand Dunes National Park, which is in the center of our study area. However, the spatial and temporal extent of this usage is as of yet unknown. Now, while many of Colorado's mine shafts have been observed for bat populations, to the extent of our knowledge, none have been observed for other wildlife. So this study set out to be the first. To that effect, we asked ourselves several questions. Number one, are wildlife using mines? And if so, what species are using them? Number two, how are they using them? Are animals entering mines and remaining overnight, or through the winter in the case of black bears, which may suggest their use as a thermoregulatory refuge? And does usage change seasonally? Will we expect to see a change in usage during the winter months? And would this collaborate with our second question, indicating that these mines are being used as thermoregulatory refuges? Number four, are mines used selectively? Will a mine's elevation, the angle of the slope that it's on, or even the size of its opening affect how often it is visited? We decided to focus on carnivores to be the first to research this particular study area. So let's take a look at our study area. Here we are in Alamosa, Colorado. To the east is the Sarnia Crista Mountain Range that many of you may have seen walking or driving this classroom today. This was our study area. In fact, we ranged all the way from the southern tip of Blanca Massive to Valley Hot Springs at the northern end of the San Luis Valley. Now, these yellow pins and green markers are marking out possible mine shaft locations for our study. Obviously, there are quite a number of them, and we had to determine which ones would be viable. So mines were grouped into discrete sets. Each set was then assigned random numbers. Mines were visited in this order to allow us a relatively random population of mine shafts for observation. As you can see here, we have a large swath of wilderness area that was deemed not suitable for study due to the fact that we did not have permission to enter this area at the time that this study first started. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, we used cameras for this study. Now, cameras have proven a very effective observational tool for a number of reasons. They're non-invasive. Once the cameras are set, they have very little impact on the comings and goings of the wildlife that we are trying to observe. They also allow researchers to overcome observational difficulty. This is of great interest to researchers when the Sarnia Crista Mountain Range in winter have very harsh conditions. They also allow for 24/7 recording. As long as the batteries are charged and the memory cards are not full, these cameras will record anything that comes in front of them. And most importantly for our study, they allow for the simultaneous study of multiple species and taxa, which means that we can observe not only, for instance, pumas and bears, but any other smaller or other-sized carnivores that are using these mine shafts. Now, the cameras operate on a fairly simple principle. Once a camera is set, it will emit an infrared beam, much like the beam I'm projecting onto this far wall. Once something breaks the beam, the camera will trigger and take a photograph. Now, this is very effective. Many animals, and while many animals trigger these cameras, they're not the only things to do so. As you can see in this photograph, we have twigs, sticks, falling leaves, and even the varying patterns of light on rock faces can all trigger these camera traps, generally leading to a very high increase in the amount of data you have to process. However, in this case, the pros outweigh the cons, and we set multiple camera traps at the San Luis Valley. In some cases, our field teams got lucky, and we had convenient framing timbers around mine shafts on which to place cameras. In other cases, we had to use trees or T-posts on which to gain a relatively wide field of view of the mine shaft to properly observe it. All the cameras were set in metal lock boxes that were painted with the label ASU Research to deter thievery and promote respect in the community. This being said, we still lost several cameras to thieves during the course of this study. Now, mines were visited and cameras were checked at the researcher's convenience. Generally, checks consist of returning to mine shafts, swapping out batteries and memory cards for new ones so that data could be processed. Now, mine checks occurred regularly during summer and fall and sparsely in spring. The harsh conditions experienced by the Sarnia Crista Mountain Range in wintertime generally prevented our research teams from checking those cameras at that time. So let's return to our questions. Are wildlife using mines? After our first year of study, we can definitely say that yes, wildlife are using mines. In fact, we observed 40 species of wildlife in our mine shafts in our first year of study. However, we focused only on carnivores, of which we observed 10 species, listed here. In our first year of study, we observed carnivores at 23 out of the 29 observed mine shafts. and they were observed performing a number of behaviors in and around these shafts, which I'll go into later. We've currently observed all local carnivores known to inhabit the area of the Southern Crystal Mountain Range, barring 4. The American pine marten, American badger, northern raccoon, and lynx have yet to be observed in this study. Now you may have noticed this sneaky pumas in the background of our presentation so far. He or she, it's a little difficult to tell, with pumas only another puma would care anyway, was one of the first carnivores observed during this study. We also observed gray fox, bobcat, other puma, and bears. However, we did not focus only on large carnivores. We also observed a number of smaller carnivores, such as weasels, striped skunks, and their cousins, the spotted skunk. These carnivores were all observed in close spatial and temporal proximity to their larger brethren. We also found something that we did not expect, and a species that came as quite a surprise to the project. Does anybody recognize this? If not, I wouldn't be surprised. This is actually the first time I had seen one of these myself. This is a ring-tailed cat, a small carnivore most commonly found in deserts. Why this is interesting to the project is because this is the first documented occurrence of this species in the Southern Crystal Mountain Range. In fact, we found they were quite abundant. This species was observed in a number of different mine shafts performing a number of activities. Some of them even appear to be using these mine shafts as thermoregulatory refuges, which leads us into our next question. How are wildlife using mines? Well, it appears they have a multifaceted use. Different organisms use them for different activities. If we return to our background shot, this photograph was taken at 9:11 a.m., September 11, 2017. This photograph was captured 9:35 a.m. on the same day, meaning that there's roughly a 20-minute difference between this puma leaving and this bear entering. Now, while this miss may have been deliberate or coincidental, it's hard to say, but we do see these mine shafts being used in very close proximity. This is supported by these photographs, which show pumas using these mines in tandem. So why are animals returning to these mines? Well, to answer that, let's think about a mine shaft. It's basically just a large hole in the ground or in the wall, correct? Now this hole will act as a vacuum in this environment. This vacuum will collect certain biotic and abiotic factors, such as seeds from our very own ponderosa pine. These seeds will create a niche of opportunity for local seed eaters and hoarders, like mice, rats, or chipmunks. Now if I'm an up-and-coming chipmunk, I want to find an area that is high in resources, well protected from the elements, and that I won't have to compete for, such as a mine shaft. This increase in small prey activity will naturally draw larger, more predatory nature consumers to these mine shafts. So larger carnivores are returning to these mine shafts because of the opportunity created for animals lower down the food chain. They are also being used as a carnivore refuge. As we can see here, this gray fox appears to have found a den for the night, until the den's owner returns home to fend him off. This is a spotted skunk. Now, while this might seem like nothing special, most animals don't want to get sprayed by a skunk, we have to remember that this skunk is maybe 1/6 the size of that fox. So it's a considerable risk for him to defend his territory, which means that there are probably enough of them to go around. This supports the idea that animals and mainly carnivores are returning to these mines on a semi-permanent to permanent basis. We also see evidence of scenting. As you can see here, the bear and the puma both appear to be sniffing the same area of the rock face, which suggests these mines are being used as landmarks by local carnivores. It's supported by these photos of a bobcat who appears to be scent marking part of his territory, or perhaps carving out territory in a new area. Does use change season? This question is answered best by this figure. As we can see, we see a significant increase in visitation during the winter months. In fact, we can prove this using a chi-squared goodness fit test. Now this increase is very exciting, but why are we seeing it? Well, to answer that, we must return to our second question. Why are animals using these mine shafts? Well, one of our first hypotheses was that bears were using these mine shafts in the winter as hibernaculums. So far, evidence has not supported this due to the fact that bears, while they did visit, were visiting randomly and did not appear at any mine shaft for a significant period of time. Now, while bears might not be using these mine shafts as thermoregulatory refuges, we do see evidence of other animals using them to fill a similar niche. For instance, this puma, who appears in multiple photos over the course of several months, returning to the same mine shaft, which suggests that these mine shafts are being used as thermoregulatory refuges by pumas and other carnivores. Our fourth question, are mines used selectively? On the x-axis here, we have mine elevation. On the y, number of visits. As we can see, as elevation increases, visitation decreases. Now, whether this is due to a distance from water, lack of resources, or simply the colder temperatures often experienced at higher elevations is difficult to say. We also see a difference in portal size. So the larger mine shafts, outlined in gray here, often received significantly less visitation than smaller entrance portals at similar elevations. We also see vertical shafts almost exclusively on the x-axis with zero visitation, barring one outlier that may have occurred due to the fact that that single mine was maybe a meter deep. Now, this would follow if we think of these vertical shafts from an animal's perspective. If I'm a puma, I cannot easily enter or exit a mine to forage or perhaps find prey or take shelter from the elements. The same holds true for local seed eaters. They cannot easily enter and store their food. Now let's look at total visitation by species. As you can see here, the majority of visitation was taken up primarily by puma, spotted skunk, and ringtail. Now why this is happening is still unclear, but it does prove that species are returning to these mines very highly in certain areas. We also see a large population of human visitation. These were actually mostly hunters and hikers who stumbled in front of our cameras. Now let's add this third variable, the number of mines visited by species. Here we see our most prevalent species, the puma, with 42 total visits. However, of those 42 visits, they only visited 15 actual mines, which suggests that these animals are returning to the same mines preferentially over other mines in the area. Now, whether this is simply a case of territorial exclusion is hard to say, and further evidence may support or disclaim this. Now, as I mentioned before, we do not only record carnivore species. These cameras are non-exclusive, and will record anything that happens to stumble in front of them, such as these pack rats, who appear to be fighting over this piece of territory in the den. As we can see here, these pack rats ranged up and down the den before finding themselves on the precipice when the loser, deciding that he had lost, will take his opponent with him, throwing himself from the edge. And I'm not sure what you thought of that, but I definitely saw that. That's how that played out in my mind. Now, this is very entertaining. It also adds a new line of questioning. What effect are these mine shafts having on the region as a whole, rather than simply their effect on carnivores? Another observation was thought of very recently. These bighorns seen here were observed in the past couple of months. And if we take a close look at this one on the left, it appears to be licking the outside of this mine shaft. We see this behavior again here. Now, these bighorn appear to be using this mine as a mineral lick, which raises the question, are these mine shafts exposing enough nutrients to be used as a basic resource? Future observations may support this or deny this. In conclusion, are wildlife using mines? Yes. During our first year of observation, 40 species were documented, 10 of them carnivores. How are they using them? Again, these mines have a very multifaceted use for various species. Some are using them as refuges or as territory markers, and even storage areas. Does usage change seasonally? Yes. We see a significant increase in mine visitation between late fall and early spring, which supports the idea that these mines are being used as thermoregulatory refuges by certain species. Mines are also used selectively. Vertical shafts, mines with large entrances, and high elevation mines receive significantly less visitation. And species visit these mines at significantly different levels, which suggests that these species are returning to the same mines preferentially. So where is this project going? The end goal of this project has always been to create a mathematical model that will help different agencies properly assess mine visitation so that they can make choices to gate or not gate the mines. Hopefully this will have significant impact on different management strategies by the Forest Service and National Park Services. We do not want to say that maybe the carnivores are here, maybe they're not, and maybe this will impact them. We want to have a definite mathematical model to help say, yes, they are here, and this will definitely impact their populations if we gate this mine. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Timothy Armstrong for first introducing me to this project, as well as Jose Mix, Tyler Kearney, Erica Ibarra, Jared Schneider, and Emily Logan for assisting, the Porter Scholars Program, and Adams State University, as well as the affiliated organizations who have all helped with this project over the years. And with that, I will open the floor to questions. Okay. All right, there we go.
Is this data publicly available at all, like your maps and things like that? Like say, I want to go out and I want to shoot a cougar, and now I know, or a mountain lion there.
That's a great question. Most of it is not, due to the fact that we do not want to tell people where these mine shafts are. We're not like, hey, there's a bunch of mountain lions up in these mine shafts. Some data is available. The Colorado Geological Survey actually mapped out where these mines originally were. I'm not sure if that data is available to the public. but this data is mainly private for the research.
We probably won't share those
Yeah.
UTM locations or any real specifics.
That's what got me questioning when you said got cameras stolen and things like that. I wonder
Yes,
if there are
the
people out there
T-posts
that
are
actively-
especially susceptible to the fact that you can kind of just walk up and pick it up and hike off of it. But we did, as I said before, we did see a number of human visitors, mostly just hikers and hunters, and some of which appear to have stumbled on the mines and some, any other questions? Yes?
So, going into, because you said, the mines are so ranging of dilapidated and falling apart, and animals going into living in them, and finding areas of mines that need attention or whatever. With people going in and affecting those habitats, is there any idea of what kind of effect that would have on the animals using them constantly, just from people
Human
going in and
visitation.
working on them?
Are you talking about human visitation or the actual gating of the mine shaft?
Yeah, like coming in and gating them and going and checking
A
them.
great question. So that's really where this project is leading. The kind of pros and cons are, will gating this mine shaft affect the local carnivore populations in a significant way versus will gating this mine shaft help the bat populations?
Right.
So is gating this off going to help the bats or help the predators? And so really what we're trying to do is to help determine a mathematical model to kind of allow better management strategies to be put in practice. So for instance, if a large bat population is using the mine shaft as a hibernation roost, we generally don't want to be letting very many travelers in there, so we might say maybe gate that one. But if they're not using a certain mine, and a lot of animals are, we would say that one should be fine, because
Right.
nothing's going to be tracking spores in there, and the carnivores are using it as a hibernaculum. Any other questions? I'm the last one, so we've got all the time here.
You sponsored by Cabela's?
No. That would be super cool though. We do use Cabela's cameras in this research. God, the Reconox, I'm not sure exactly what model, but yeah, we do use Cabela's cameras. That would be super fun though.
No, all the pictures are
Yeah.
stay out there.
Have
Yeah.
y'all thought about live feed cameras and whatnot?
Personally, I'm not sure if we have it with the project. The live feed cameras are very expensive and they transmit a radio signal on a very short basis. So the idea of setting 30 live feed cameras across these summers would be
Right.
super cool for observational purposes, but a little outside of our budget.
Right. Is there any mating also, like animals, babies, or did y'all like see that patterns?
I don't believe we've observed any mating young or cubs in our photographs. We have seen, as previously stated, this is actually the second cougar to exit this mine. We actually have two puma coming in and out of this mine on several occasions, so we are seeing them using these mines in tandem, but no mating behavior has been observed.
One young bobcat, but it was on its own. It was
Right.
probably like its first year away from its mom, but it wasn't traveling with its mother. It just, their face is just a little different. You can tell it's a young cat, but it was moving alone, so.
So,
I was just worried about seasons and how those affect visits or populations. And
Yeah.
if anything's been done on that side, because most things were not in snowy winter or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I took best quality photos. Often with the snowy photos, it's a little hard to distinguish what's using the mines. Often we just see fur. So these were the best, like, oh, that's obviously a puma. But as stated earlier in the project, the visitation increases significantly during the winter, and we do suspect that these mines are being used as refuges to get kind of out of the cold, which is why we might not want to gate certain mines if they see a very high visitation in the winter, as it would deprive certain animals of this refuge. Yes?
So you said you documented the first photo of the ring-tailed cat.
Exactly.
What has that done for like the Department of Wildlife, or like, because they didn't know they were here right now, you have proof that they are, like what does that cause now for like the community?
In terms of management strategies, I'm not honestly sure. We did report it to the Park Services of the Great Savings National Park as well as the Forest Service. But I'm not sure what we've done with that information in terms of community or how that's affected our overall management strategies. More of just kind of interesting piece that
Yeah, that's
it's like, oh, wait, there's cats up there.
Yeah, the forest is trying to determine how widespread they are, but really, we're the only ones who have any data, so we'll share those data with them. The park was very excited about it, they put it on Facebook or something and had a lot of excitement about
It's a
that.
great PR opportunity, those
Right.
things are freaking cute.
Yeah, that's super cool.
All right, well, I think that's it.